Welcome to October's ESEA office hours. As usual, the ESEA team is here to provide timely updates for all of you folks and to share information that we have within the scope of our work. So the big one probably on everybody's radar at this moment is where we are in regards to access of federal funds during the federal shutdown. So during the current federal government shutdown, the system in which we utilize to draw down funds on your behalf is operational and available to the Maine Department of Education and the fiscal staff who access those reimbursement requests. Therefore, your federal grant fund programs should be able to operate as usual for the foreseeable future. The U.S. Department of Ed's contingency plan states that the federal funding for programs such as IDEA, ESEA, and other federal forward-funded programs will remain available. Again, we are providing you with as much timely information as we have, and all we can say at this moment with the information that we have as a department is, while funding remains available, most federal staff members have been furloughed and are therefore unavailable to respond to requests for technical assistance. So should we as a department need support from our counterparts in the U.S. Department of Education, they are not in the office to provide any of that technical support. So this may cause some delays in processing reimbursements, but the Maine Department of Education has not received any definite information about that. The Maine DOE will continue to monitor the situation and provide updates. Our office, the ESEA Federal Programs Office here at the Maine Department of Education, as well as the Maine Department of Education, remain open and ready to support and assist all of you folks. Next topic for today is our FY26 ESEA monitoring. So all schools who were identified with a medium or high monitoring status have been notified. They were notified back at the beginning of August. And that information, your monitoring status information, is available on the FY26 grant award notification. And the grant award notification is available in the ESEA Consolidated application. For more information on the monitoring process, you can visit our website, which provides you all of the documentation that we will be collecting for medium and high SAUs. Our monitoring instrument, along with our training, will open and be offered on October 16th, which is next Thursday at 3 o'clock. So if you are a medium SAU that has been denoted as a medium monitoring status, we encourage you to participate in that training. The training will be recorded, however, attendance is highly recommended, so questions and clarification can be communicated in a timely manner. There's some changes to the FY26 monitoring process. One of the major changes you'll see here on this slide is that we are reducing our windows from 2, which we had a fall and a spring window last year to submit documentation, to 1 window for this year. So our monitoring instrument will open on October 16th, and all items from SAUs that are medium or high will be due in the system by January 9th of 2026. I do see some questions in the chat box. The team is monitoring the chat box. If we happen at the end of this presentation, we'll address any questions that we may not have been able to address in our material.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here to remind all of you of some pertinent deadlines. You might be here today, in fact, because we're about to go over the performance report and how to complete it. But really, some major points to understand and have completed is your invoicing for FY25 through 9/30. So everybody should have that last invoice get over to September 30, that halfway mark. It's going to be important for a couple statutory reasons in the law. So just be mindful of that. They will populate within the application. So you would go to navigate to FY25 again. It's not a separate application. We have pages that open and become available at this time. A lot of reporting is what's at stake here about your outcomes on your goals that you outlined in your application for last school year, your expenditures through that September 30th date. There are a few supplemental data pages in the various titles that directly get reported to the U.S. Department of Education that is related to your programs and enrollment, goals, and such. And then the Title 1A waiver request that'll go into more details later. Also part of a performance report is that closeout of the grant that is expiring 9/30 and has to be liquidated by the end of the calendar year. So very important to be mindful of your grants that are open besides 25, the 23 and 24 grants. And 23 is the one that's expiring because we received a tidings amendment waiver for 24. Otherwise, both of those years would have been closing. And comments are going to be made on the consultant checklist. We have additional items that get populated in there that specifically relate to the performance report.
And I do want to address the question in the chat box verbally, just so that it is noted. In the past, our due date for the performance report was indeed 11/1. We tried to stay true to that 11/1 date. However, it was not in our capacity to be able to open the performance report by October 1st. So in lieu of being able to open on October 1st, we are opening the window and extending the due date to 11/14.
Yes, thank you. Usually it's 11/1, and this year it's 2 weeks later. So you still have about a month. But the Title 1A Summer Reallocated Performance Report is due this week. For many folks, it's been a relatively seamless process. Again, you'll finish all invoicing of the grant because these funds have expired. If your application seems uneditable, it might not be in the status of revision started, so make sure that is the case. There's just one page to fill out where you report your expenditures, program details, goal outcomes, and I will then close it out and approve it. And that will be the final piece for the Title I summer programs that SAUs ran this year. Thank you all again for applying and running the programs and reporting out what's worked. My hope is to put together another guidance if we continue to have enough funding for these programs every summer. I'm hoping to use what you report out as effective practices as part of our training next year. So thank you all.
Good morning, everyone. For FY27, so next year's ESEA funding, now is the time for non-publics to input their low-income student data. Now, to try to make the process more streamlined and in aligned with our data practices, they're inputting that information into Synergy. The data team was going to switch to Connect, but now it's back to Synergy, so it's the same process as last year. The due date is October 15th. If the non-public is having any issues inputting data, they should reach out to Allie Cookson on the data team. Her email is right on the screen. We hosted a webinar with the data team. We can put that link in the chat. Non-public should first watch that to learn what the expectations are and try it out on their own, and then reach out to us if you have any issues. That deadline is tomorrow. And again, in order for non-publics to be eligible for Title I dollars for next school year, they need to input this data. So ESEA coordinators, please reach out to your non-publics. Thank you very much.
Tyra, I think you're muted right now.
Sorry. Good morning, everyone. It's important that you get your FY25 invoices in so that your performance report can be submitted timely and approved. Should you request reimbursement for a time period of 10/1 and beyond, it will not be processed until you have your FY25 performance report approved. So just keep that in mind. Grants for Me only allows the SAU to submit one invoice at a time for each title until that invoice receives a status of state accounting system paid. I want to make sure that you understand that if you were to submit an invoice for FY23, that does not stop you from submitting an invoice for FY25 for the same title at the same time. The only restriction is when it's for the same grant year, same title. Open grants. There are several open grants right now that you may have funds available in. FY23 is indeed closing out. All of the invoices for FY23 should have a service period ending 9/30/25. Just like it was when we used GEMS, the service period has to reflect the period of performance for the grant. So keep in mind that FY23 is closing along with the Title I reallocated and FY24 Tier 3 school improvement. When communicating via email, please be clear, concise, and effective. In your subject line, identify the SAU, the grant year in the title that you have concerns over. It is very hard to go and look for what I call a needle in a haystack if I don't have that information. Your signature does not identify the SAU or the school that you are requesting information about. This is also holds true for when you're emailing your regional program managers. It's helpful to them to know which school. We may not recognize your name because there's a lot of new people out there. Reimbursement reminders, 2 key dates to remember: substantial approval date, especially for FY26, where there may be 2 different substantial approval dates, one for Title I and 5, and the other titles 2, 3, and 4 may differ from Title I and 5. So be sure that you are checking your substantial approval date before submitting invoices for reimbursement. As you know, you cannot obligate the funds until you have substantial approval. All invoices need to be within the period of performance of the grant. That's especially important when entering into a contractual agreement. Those services cannot extend beyond the end date for that grant. Services cannot start before the substantial approval date, and they must end before the end date of the period of performance. Grant closeout, spending down funds and invoicing for funds expiring. Again, be aware that the service period on the request page in Grants for Me cannot extend beyond the period of the end date of the period of performance. Wages and benefits need to be earned in the period of performance of the grant, and supplies need to be obligated and received before the end of the liquidation period. For these types of reimbursement requests, be sure to upload a trial balance for the time frame in which the expense is posted. So in other words, your service period on the request page may end 9/30. However, your say you ordered supplies on 9/29, they're not going to post to your trial balance until 10 something, right, in October. So just make sure that that trial balance is uploaded. I know that the service period won't match the trial balance, but that is proof that you indeed paid those expenses. Proof that wages were earned before the grant's end date. That's important. I received recently Title I reallocated invoice requests for salary and benefits for September. That grant is a special purpose grant, and it is for your Title I reallocated summer programming. It cannot cover your regular Title I salaries. And proof that supplies were ordered. Remember, a PO does not provide an obligation date. You must put in there some kind of confirmation of when those supplies were ordered if you're using grant funds that are expiring. Vendor invoices such as Amazon have a timestamp of when the supplies were ordered. This is just additional notes. Subscriptions, services must be researched during the period of performance. The service period must not exceed 3 months in grants for me unless you are required to invoice monthly because you receive more than $250,000 in any one title. Timely submissions are always important. We are grateful right now that our service center is turning around approved invoices rather quickly. Most of you are receiving your reimbursements within 2 weeks of submitting them. This is a reminder that federal fiscal office hours are going to be on October 23rd. They happen quarterly at 10 a.m. Please go on our webpage under the DOE calendar and register for the upcoming federal fiscal office hours.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to use the rest of our time this morning to dive into some details about the FY25 performance report. So hopefully everyone can get their questions answered, knows what they need to report out on here in the next month. Your performance report does serve as that mid-grant check-in that allows us at Maine DOE to check in with you and see how that grant spending is going. It also allows you as an ESE coordinator or business manager to get on the same page as your counterpart so that hopefully by the time the grant ends in 12 months, you'll have spent down all of your funds. As is mentioned already, there is some federal reporting that we have to do at the mid-year check-in, so we get that data from you folks and pass it on to our federal counterparts. And there are some statutory requirements around Title I carryover that we need to follow, and we also look at rank and distribution to make sure that when the grant ends, you're still in compliance there. So it is an important check-in for everyone here at that 15-month point of the 27-month grant period. So as Tyra has alluded to, one of the first big parts of the performance report is reporting on project expenditures. So these are all the pages that are outlined in blue. Go back one slide for me, Shelley. There we go. So all of these project expenditure pages, and you'll notice all of our performance report pages say performance report in all capital letters. So that's how you know those are the pages you have to complete as part of this process. So your project expenditures are, what you would think they are. They are your expenses from individual projects from the last 15 months or from your date of substantial approval through 9/30/25. Keep in mind your business office is going to invoice by title, and you have to report on your expenditures by project. So if you're a larger SAU, you may have to do a little bit of work to figure out where those Title I expenses or Title II expenses were actually spent. And like Tyra mentioned, if you're a little bit behind on invoicing, this is the time to be getting caught up because you cannot receive an approved performance report without having your invoicing up to date through 9/30/25. There are a couple pages that we check and that can help you kind of check your math when you're reporting your project expenditures. So one of them is called the project totals by grant page. So this will show you your original allocation and title, if you transferred any funds in, and then that new adjusted allocation. When you enter figures on those project expenditure pages, they then populate here on the expenditure totals. So in green, you'll see this SAU has invoiced or has reported that they've expended all of their Title I Part A funds. They've reported spending none of their Title II Part A funds. And they reported spending some of their Title IV funds, but not all of them. Now, when we look at the invoicing system, we see that yes, indeed, they have invoiced for all of their Title I Part A funds, so those figures match. However, it looks like they have actually received some Title IIA funds. They have a pending invoice for more. So they're missing expenditures on a project expenditure page for Title II. And we see kind of a similar situation down here with Title IV. Some expenditures have been reported and are incorrect, and others need to be invoiced for. So these are the things we're checking, and this is why communication between your business manager and your ESEA coordinator is so important, because if these figures are off, your performance report is going to be returned so they can be corrected. And lastly, if you're a business manager, you're more familiar with this page than ESEA coordinator. But when we look here for this SAU, we can see they are missing their July, August, and September of 2025 invoice. So that service period has not been completed. And they may, depending on how much is being invoiced for, have to submit monthly. Look at that June invoice rate for 138,000. So if that were the case, they have 3 invoices potentially to submit. Maybe 1 depending on how much it is, but they've got to get that done before we can check their performance report. One of the other big pages to complete your performance report is your goals. So we have 3 different types of goals, right? You have your SAU level goals, your school level goals, and you may have a non-public school with goals. So you'll notice on the goals page, the performance report district profile goals, your goal from FY25 populates automatically in that gray box. That cannot be changed. And what you're going to do is report out on the actual outcome in the white box below. And then this year, we've added a question where you are simply going to report, did your SAU meet that goal or not? So again, we're looking for your actual outcome here. There are some scenarios where maybe there's been a change in leadership. Maybe that original goal was not something you're able to measure. If any of those things happen, make sure you explain that in the actual outcome box. You should be providing a similar data point if you can find one, and then you would report not meeting that goal. But just keep in mind, you're always reporting something here. And if, let's say, you're at a point where you need to revise your ESEA application and not submit your performance report, you can just put an NA here in these required boxes while we get those revisions completed, so maybe you can complete your invoicing. School goals look very similar, right? The same structures there. Your goals from last year should carry forward and be in gray boxes. You are reporting on your outcomes in the white boxes. However, there's no yes, no flag for did you meet that goal at the district level, because that's data, or at the school level, I should say, because that's data we're not required to collect at the federal level. And of course, this is only required for SAUs that have more than one school. If there's only one school in your district, then that's a box you check off that says we're a 1 school district, and you don't complete this page. And lastly, our non-public schools, their goals are reported on the non-public schools reconciliation page, I think Shelley's going to talk about in a little while. But it's separate, and it's separate for each non-public school project. The structure for reporting on goals is the same as other school goals. Their goal from last year carries forward. It's in gray. You report on their outcome in white below. It is not completed on their forms anymore. Their forms are just for reconciling their expenses.
Great. And Ryan mentioned this briefly, but very important as you are spending down what you've budgeted in your grants, that you're maintaining rank and distribution for Title I. Many SAUs in the state of Maine don't have rank and distribution rules, but there are many that do. And so again, the intent and purpose of Title I is assisting your highest poverty schools. So when you apply each year, we take a look at how the per pupil amounts are looking for each of the schools, and based on your priority grade spans or your poverty rates, we ensure that they're being budgeted at the correct ranking for those highest need schools. But of course, as you spend down, sometimes the spending doesn't exactly align to the amounts budgeted. However, with those that have to follow Title I rank and distribution, it's important that they follow as closely as possible. So you're not spending at a lower poverty school at higher rates than what you had budgeted at your highest poverty school. This is a page that auto-populates and it gets pulled from the school projects, so not your homeless set aside, for instance, but all of your Title I schools, what you've budgeted from your rank and distribution page as you report out your expenditures. There's a summary, a Title I rank and distribution summary page that shows, and you can go to the next page, Shelley. And it shows sort of what you had to take a look at each of these columns. It's important to note, right? Enrollment, how many low income students, the poverty percentage then that's calculated from the low income students that are enrolled, your total project allocation, those per pupil amounts, and then what you're reporting as expenditures. And so then taking a look at those per pupil amounts, that first school at the highest poverty rank right now, this SAU has only spent $754 per those pupils, which is 38% less than they should be. And so that's one of those moments where if you haven't spent everything down, this is a moment to redirect, to correct, and to be spending at your highest poverty schools. Because, for instance, with FY23 closeout, if you're closed out and you don't have any funds left and the rank and distribution hasn't been maintained, it can mean a return of funds in order for the rank and distribution to be maintained. So this is an important Title I law, part of the law, and it's important that you are serving your highest poverty or your priority grade spans in the order that you ranked them. And another huge part of Title I Part A is spending them the year they're awarded. We think of high poverty schools, we think of the students that need them in the classrooms right now. So Title I has a fairly, I would say, strict law when it comes to the carryover. For LEAs that have more than 50,000 in Title I, so more than 50,000, if you have less than 50,000 in Title I, this does not pertain to you. You should be spending those funds the year they're awarded. I'm certainly not of the mind to think that you're hoarding them and not spending them down, but it's just important to note that this does not relate to every SAU. So for SAUs with more than 50,000 in Title I, the rule is that you can't be carrying over more than 15%. So take a look at how this page shows you, right? It shows the total Title I Part A allocation that was received. It then will populate the expenditures according to what you as a coordinator have reported in your Title I schools and your homeless set-aside project or your family engagement projects. So it will calculate your total expenditures. It will then indicate the amount that's remaining in Title I, and it'll show you that percent remaining. If it's under 15%, you're where you want to be. You do not need a waiver, and you should spend those down in the next 12 months and be all set. If that's showing you more than 15%, your SAU has two choices or multiple choices to consider. If you have more than 15% of carryover in Title I, and you need those funds, you want to keep those funds, then you would be requesting a waiver. You are essentially asking the state to waive that rule, and we have the permission to do that once every 3 fiscal years. We have been requesting from the USDE a blanket waiver for us as a state to waive that rule, waive and waive and waive all of these rules, and we've been receiving that, but there's no guarantee, and there's especially no guarantee with how things are now. So when you go out to do your performance report in Title I, take a look at what's remaining. If you have more than 15%, talk to your team about whether you're going to be taking a waiver and keeping those funds, and then know that that might mean that those funds can't be retained fiscal year 27, 26, thereafter. If it's a little bit over or a lot, or you guys you believe that you don't need these funds anymore and you don't want to take a waiver because you don't want to be penalized in future years, then you could say no. let's say you have 16% left in Title I and you say no waiver, we are going to be taking 1% of your Title I and returning it. So we would end up reducing your allocation by that additional 1% that you went over the threshold. So those are options you have. It's very important to understand what you're saying when you say yes or no, and what that means for future years.
Thank you, Rita. I'm going to cover the Title 1A supplemental data pages. So this is information that we report to the federal government. So we want to know the number of Title I programs you have, so which schools are targeted assistance programs and which are school-wide. We want to know how many students are enrolled in these programs. So for the targeted assistance programs, it should just be those identified Title I students. For the school-wide programs, it's all of the students in those Title I schools. So this is what that looks like on the page. Well, at least the the student counts. So we have student by ethnicity, student by grade counts. These should be the same totals. You should have the same totals of Title I schools in when they're divided by ethnicity and when they're divided by grade. So we check that. And then we wanted to highlight some trouble areas that we sometimes see on this page. So if you are noting who is in your targeted assistance program, we want to know what content area you're working with them on. Could be reading language arts, could be science, math, and so on. So there shouldn't be a higher number of students, for example, in the reading and language arts than you have for Title I students, right? So we're just thinking logically here, what services are you providing them? And then below is just support services. Title I students can also have special rights, especially homeless students with eye care, dental care, things like that. So next page. And then staff, who are you paying with these Title I dollars? And if they're full-time, you can put 1. If they are not full-time, we're looking at their FTE, so you can put 0.5, 0.2, whatever percentage of time they're working in the building with Title I students. And the next one is marking Title I teachers and Title I ed techs. So again, in that school-wide model, it's going to be all teachers and ed techs, targeted assistants. It's just ones working with the Title I identified students. So we want to know how many teachers there are, and then how many of those teachers are certified. Same for ed techs. How many ed techs are there, and how many of those ed techs are certified?
Great. Title I Part D also has a supplemental data page for those 3 SAUs and Long Creek. Because you're working with students who are living in these facilities, our data page here looks different. It's about the type of program and facility that your SAU, your local partner at NFI has, or Long Creek. The students served, that's a big one. Transition services is another, as 15%, at least 15 to 30% of your funding in Title I Part D goes to transition services. Academic and vocational outcomes is a major one. Are they graduating? Are they getting their GAD? Are they in credit recovery? How are these students doing that are living in these facilities? Academic performance in reading and math. There are training slides that I went over. This was last year's training with all of our Subpart 2 partners, and we go more into the supplemental data page there. It's important to note that we've had a fairly new data point where it asks for the average number of instructional days in Title I-D. So essentially, right, if students are living in the facilities, they're probably not in school on the weekends, but they might be receiving services that Title I Part D pays for during the week, or Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And if that's the case, those are your average length of instructional days for Title I, and it should never be greater than length of stay. Because again, they are staying in these facilities and at some points receiving services that are paid for with these funds.
All right, hello again, folks. Like Marty McFly, we are going back to the future. So Some of you may recall in the past from more veteran coordinators that you used to have a page called the Title II Supplemental Data Report you had to fill out, and that page is now back. In the intervening years, the federal government collected this data themselves. Many of you had to report out on how your Title IIA funds were spent, and that went directly to Ed. But that is no longer the case, so we are required as a state to collect this data. So this page will appear in the performance report as your Title IIA Supplemental Data Report. You will add in any district projects that utilize Title IIA funds using that Add Row feature. You'll list the number of participating teachers, principals, and other school leaders who may have benefited from those funds. Your best estimate here is all we're asking for. I can understand if this was a training you might have done back in September of 24. You may not have the exact figures, but you know just about how many folks work in your schools. And then you're going to select all the boxes that apply in terms of how the funds were used. So we've tried to list some of the most common uses of Title IIA, like PD, class size reduction, evaluation, recruitment retention, in-service trainings. We've then given you another option, right? If you have something else that is allowable under Title IIA that you spent these funds on. We also have a box if you spent these under your school-wide plan. And lastly, if you all used the funds for something else. So again, this is going to be required for all folks who receive Title IIA and did not transfer those funds out. You're going to report out on all your projects, the number of folks who benefited from them, and what those funds were spent on.
All right, good morning, everyone. So continuing on our track here of supplemental data pages within the ESEA performance report, we do have a page dedicated to the Title IVA program. I do want to clarify that this page is required of all SAUs, regardless of Title IVA funding or transfer status. And essentially what folks are reporting on here is the extent to which the SAU is making progress in relation to its identified goals for each of the distinct subcategories for the Title IVA program, those being well-rounded education, student health and safety, and of course the effective use of technology. Now you'll see here that each of these areas has its own distinct drop-down menu as well as a comment box. The expectation here is that, for example, if your SAU is one that transfers all of their Title IVA funds to another program, or for whatever other reason doesn't receive Title IVA funds, you would select not applicable from the drop-down menu and also enter a comment of NA in these comment boxes. However, if you do leverage Title IV funds under the Title IV program for these specific types of purposes, we would expect you to indicate the extent to which your SAU made progress in relation to its goals. So some progress, significant progress, etc. And then in those comment boxes here, we would expect some context surrounding what it is that you did or achieved in relation to that content area.
One of the last pages that is in the performance report is related to SAUs that serve as the public entity for our non-public schools and provide equitable services to those non-public schools. This form, as noted earlier, will only have information associated with the expenditures and what has been utilized for that non-public school. Goals are now populated on the school page, and each non-public will have their own school page. On this document itself, each document will be required for each non-public within that SAU boundaries, being sure that all invoicing and all services have been provided through 9/30 of 2025. You will denote if there are any remaining funds and how those unused funds will be utilized in the carryover in the next 12 months. Again, we've made it quite clear today that the funds that are awarded should be used in the federal fiscal year that they are awarded, and that is true in regards to our non-publics as well. So the form does provide some options and also an opportunity just to explain if there was a circumstance that did not allow equitable services to be provided during that federal fiscal year, in which the funds were awarded. We as a team review those circumstances and determine if it is an allowable circumstance. We also, at times, reach out to our U.S. Department of Ed folks. As you know, that means that we would have a delayed response in our current situation. So our team is really taking each one of those circumstances, should there be a circumstance, and evaluating it on the merit of the U.S. Department of Ed in regards to the identification of the opportunity to potentially use those funds in the next 12 months. All funds could be returned to the U.S. Department of Ed and or the SAU. So again, review the form. It is available under the performance report header in the Grants for Me application.
All right, so another important but I guess often forgot about requirement for this time of year is the closeout of funding for a prior fiscal year. Now, typically the way this works for our ESEA programs is at the time that you would complete a particular fiscal year's performance report, the direct preceding fiscal year's closeout report would become due. We're a little bit off of that time frame now due to some recent tidings amendment waivers that the state of Maine received from the federal government. So at the time that we're doing the FY25 performance report, we're also being tasked with the closeout of FY23 as opposed to FY24 funds. Now, for those who may be unfamiliar with the closeout process, essentially what this is a secondary revision to your FY23, in this case, application, following the completion and approval of your performance report that serves as a final reconciliation of how project funds were expended. Now, now we are also in the midst of the liquidation period for 23 funds. The obligation date for those, as a reminder, ended on September 30th of this year. So now is the time, if you haven't done so already, to be working with your business offices to finalize any expenses and payment requests related to 23 funds, because the process, like it is with the 25 performance report, is that all expenses need to be invoiced for and received through September 30th before that closeout report can be completed. And again, as a reminder, this is something that is required as part of your performance report process. So essentially, we'll be looking at these two in tandem. And please note that you won't be able to receive approval on your 25 performance report until such time as FY23 is also closed out. Okay, just a couple of final reminders here. The Maine Department of Ed does have a pretty comprehensive PD calendar that outlines really anything and everything being offered through the department for the long term here. I will throw this link in chat so folks have access to it. You know, if your SAU is looking for you know, upcoming fall professional development opportunities, perhaps you have an in-service day coming up or something like that. Some great resources here to be browsing through and planning around to support the needs of your teachers and your staff. And then, of course, for anyone who may be relatively new to their role, we on the ESEA team here do divide the state up based on superintendent region. So if you have any need for immediate support from a member of our team, we encourage you to take a look at the information provided here and reach out to the ESEA program manager, who is the specific point person for your superintendent region. And then, of course, we also have a few, I'll call them outliers here. If you have questions specific to school improvement, or if you're a business manager and you have some specific questions related to ESEA funding, we do have some specific contacts for those areas as well.